Imagine you're walking by a beautiful coastline with the ocean breeze going through your hair. You live in a small town away from the distractions of the big city, and then real life slaps you in the face like beach sand. So this is how I describe Our Blues in a nutshell. When I was watching this series, I felt that calm feeling you'd get from being on the coastline or in a small town, while also feeling the stress and angst that these characters felt from the harsh realities of life. Despite its seemingly calm vibes, the show wasn't an easy watch at all. Each episode and each character deals with the very serious and difficult issues that I'm sure many people have experienced in their own lives. And it aims to show how these people manage to live their best lives and be as happy as they can, given their circumstances. With all this being said, I think it's a really good drama and is worth watching, even if it's not an easy watch at all. So, I would describe Our Blues as a slice-of-life K-drama that revolves around the lives of people in a town on Jeju Island. It's an omnibus storyline, I hope I'm saying that right, where each episode revolves around a different set of characters. Initially, when I heard about the concept of this show, I was worried that each character would be only shown for a small amount of time and then pushed aside. But I think the show does a really good job of integrating the characters throughout the series and slowly showing them when they're not the main focus of the episode. So even when an episode was mostly focused on a certain character, you still got to see the other characters throughout the episode as well, just living their lives. The characters are all given their due time, which makes it feel like you're watching a small community navigate through life. I will say that some of the stories and characters are more interesting and well done than others, but overall I really enjoyed each story to some extent. I will warn you and say that the topics these stories deal with are really tough, so don't look at Shinmin not being in a beachside K-drama and assume it'll be like hometown cha-cha-cha like I did. Admittedly, I did feel like I had to force my way through the beginning of the show since I wasn't really fully invested and aware of all the characters, and the show kind of pushes you into a story that's pretty hard to watch. But over time, I really grew to care for the characters, and it felt like I was a part of a community in some way. Personally, I think I grew more invested around episode 5 or 6. This is definitely a drama that hits its stride after a few episodes, and it gets better as it goes on. It might not be for everyone because of the slow pace and hard topics, but I think the strongly developed characters and community vibe make it worth watching. I think they dealt with the hard issues with respect and nuance. It's definitely not a good show to binge watch though. I think it's better watching slowly and over time, especially since that kind of helps you gradually feel like you're a part of this community of Jeju folk. So I kind of wanted to go through the main storylines of the show and share my thoughts on them, so spoilers from this point on. So I feel like the way this story pops up and starts in the show is kind of a bit of a slap in the face. Like, we start off seeing Eunhui go off to work at a fish market and the auction, and we see people diving in the pretty ocean and deep blue ocean vibes, and then we see Hansu dealing with a bunch of debt and being away from his daughter and wife and just generally being very sad with the life that he lives. Hansu is struggling financially and personally because he has to provide for his daughter so that she can achieve her dream of being a golf star in the US, and he's living alone while his wife and daughter are both in the US. And I think the story did a great job of showing the sacrifices that parents and families made to support their children and to give them a better life than they had. Meanwhile, Eunhui is running a fish store on Jeju Island, and she's very well off compared to Hansu. She has to deal with her friends and family constantly asking her for money to fund their lifestyles while she lives a more low-key and humble life on her own, which includes eating a lot of fried chicken, which I was very jealous of. So both Hansu and Eunhui relate to each other a lot in the show about how they both gave up their dreams to provide for their families, whether that's being a singer for Eunhui or a basketball player for Hansu. We also get to see Hansu do more and more questionable things for the sake of his family, and even though these things aren't right, the show made me root for him anyways. I like how in the end though, Hansu realizes that his daughter's dream isn't the same anymore and decides to reunite with his family and find happiness again. Personally, this story was one of the hardest ones to watch for me because of how cringy and uncomfortable it was. Like, seeing Hansu lie to Eunhui about being separated from his wife and doing small things to keep up that lie, like hiding family photos, made me cringe so much. It was even worse that his lies gave Eunhui false hope about their relationship becoming more than a friendship, and Hansu knew this and took advantage of it to get money. It was also really conflicting to watch for me because I really liked Eunhui as a character because she's just a good person who does so much for the people she cares about. But I also wanted to see Hansu kind of figure out his financial problems too. And I think the story really showed the type of person that Eunhui is because she chooses to forgive Hansu and reflect on their friendship and how she treated him. I think despite her snarky and hard personality on the outside, she's extremely caring towards the people in her life, sometimes to a fault. And instead of just being upset with him for lying, rightfully so, she thinks about how he wouldn't have had to lie to her if he had gotten the support from his supposed friends when he needed it. And she points out how nobody really bothers to check up on him throughout his life and didn't make him feel like he could reach out for help when he was having financial issues. So yeah, we love Eunhui. Overall, I really liked the story and rooted for Hansu and Eunhui right away, but I think because Hansu leaves the show after this arc finishes, the story feels more isolated and separated from the show compared to the other stories. The rest of the stories are kind of integrated and extend into other episodes, but I think this one kind of just ends and isn't mentioned much for the rest of the show. And I kind of forgot about it after I watched the rest of the show because it's at the very beginning of the show and there's so many other more stories afterwards. But it's still really a good story and I think it really does a good job of setting the tone of the show and lets you know that the show is not going to be an easy watch by any means. So I thought the first story was going to be the hardest one for me to watch, but I think this one might have been just as difficult, if not more difficult. So Youngju and Haeyeon are high school seniors, the top students in their class, and secretly dating. And Youngju gets pregnant, and their dads hate each other because of something that happened 15 years ago. So the amount of stress I felt for Youngju during this arc. Teen pregnancy isn't really a new topic for TV, but I've never felt so much stress watching it before. I was so stressed watching Youngju try and find ways to have an abortion and realizing that it wasn't accessible for her. There's the scene where she tries to sell jewelry for money and then being questioned for her age, the scene where the doctor shames her for her pregnancy instead of providing her support, and when they look for abortion pills. All these scenes really heighten the stakes for me. They also really did a good job of showing how the small town vibes of Jeju added to Youngju's stress, like where she hides her pregnancy from Eunhui at the doctor's clinic, and where she has to constantly hide her belly from her friends at school who are starting to suspect that something's going on. They also showed the impact that this pregnancy would have on the futures of both Haeyeon and Youngju. Seeing Youngju come to grips with the pregnancy and the baby changing her plans to leave Jeju and become a doctor were really heartbreaking. And Haeyeon choosing to sacrifice his education and plans to become a doctor to make sure they could provide for the baby and so that Youngju wouldn't have to drop out of school was sad but also sweet at the same time. I really like the scene where Youngju hears the heartbeat of the baby and lets out her tears and emotions about the pregnancy, which results in her changing her mind about the baby. But I didn't really like how everyone around her, even Haeyeon to some extent, had an opinion on what she should do with the baby without really taking her choice into consideration. And not only did this pregnancy have a big impact on both of their futures, it also impacted the relationship they had with their dads since they both hated each other for years. But I like how the pregnancy was also a catalyst for the dads to reconcile and communicate about their issues amongst themselves and also with their kids. Like with Haeyeon, his dad is really hard on him and he's constantly scolding him and even hitting him. Like the scene where Haeyeon endures abuse from his dad after he finds out about the pregnancy, and the scene where Haeyeon says he's embarrassed of his dad. Seeing the father-son arc end with them reconciling, hugging, and sobbing together was sad but also really satisfying as a viewer. It was also nice to see the dads hash out their drama, reconcile, and decide to support each other for the sake of their grandchild. I think this story really helped me become more invested in the show overall. It had me really stressed, waiting to see if Youngju would be able to have her abortion and seeing how the dads would react to the situation. It was nice to see the progress of Youngju's pregnancy throughout the rest of the series too, with her giving birth towards the end of the show. So, Shin Min-ha being in the show tricked me into thinking it would be like hometown cha-cha-cha at first, and clearly I was wrong. And her character in the show is nothing like Haejin. So basically, Dongsuk and Sona are childhood friends, and Dongsuk's had a crush on her for a while, and they drift apart because Dongsuk tries to kiss her and she rejects him, causing him to get angry, and they don't see each other for 7 years. So in that time, Sona's gotten married and had a child, and right now she's suffering from depression, a divorce, and a custody battle. And Dongsuk is working as a salesman, selling knickknacks and other things on a truck. So initially I had a hard time liking and being invested in Dongsuk because he starts off as an angry and really reactionary person, and he stays that way throughout the show, especially when he gets mad at the grandmas and villagers for shopping at another truck. But when thinking back to that scene after watching the entire show, I think it shows that Dongsuk is someone who really values loyalty, especially since he wasn't given that as a teenager. And I think that's partially why he gets really mad at Sona when she doesn't accept his feelings. I don't really know how I feel about Dongsuk and Sona as a couple, but I really like their relationship as friends. Seeing Dongsuk provide Sona with emotional support and friendship during a tough time with her divorce and custody battle, despite being initially angry at her, was nice to see. I also like how Sona doesn't automatically recover after her time with Dongsuk. He's not really a savior for her, but just a source of support to get her through her tough times. I thought it was cute how she looked at photos of him and listened to his voice recordings when she was having a tough time. The scene she has with her ex-husband where she tells him that she's gonna reapply for custody of their son when she recovers, and having the support of the ex-husband himself was really nice to see. I feel like you don't really see that with divorce and custody stories in movies and TV. There's usually a bad guy or a parent who isn't supportive of the other parent. But we see that the ex-husband also wants the best for Sona. The story starts off pretty laid back and less intense than the other stories, but the tone changes once we find out about Youngok's past. Initially, it seemed like a cute, lighthearted story of a new and young relationship blossoming, but then we find out about Youngok's parents and sister, Eungi, who has Down syndrome and lives in a home separate from Youngok. The show puts her past in a cloak of mystery, and she seems to keep people in the town at a distance, including Jeongjun. I think they took a little too long to reveal what her past was, but I think seeing the relationship between her and Eungi was worth the wait. So personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of Youngok's character since I found her to be a little unnecessarily cynical and cold, but I did empathize with her story of losing her parents at a young age and being responsible for taking care of her sister on her own. Initially, I found her reservations towards Jeongjun a little odd because he never shows signs of being dishonest with his intentions, and we as an audience didn't know much about Youngok. But I think once we find out about her past heartbreaks with other boyfriends, it makes a lot of sense. Eungi and Youngok's relationship is really sweet but heartbreaking at the same time, especially because Eungi is aware of how Youngok feels about her, which we find out in the scene where she calls out Youngok for leaving her in the subway as kids. Eungi feels lonely without Youngok around her, but she knows Youngok doesn't want to live with her and always be with her. And the scene where Youngok sees Eungi's artwork and sees that her sister is aware of her desire to be alone was sad, and shows how guilty Youngok feels about these desires. I think the show did a great job of showing how both women felt about their relationship and their past. The final scene of Youngok crying alone in Jeongjun's trailer was gut-wrenching, and a really great way to end that arc. Again, Eunhui deserves better. So Miran is originally from Jeju, but she lives in Seoul, and she's Eunhui's best friend. She's gone through a few marriages and divorces and has a daughter who cancels her graduation trip with Miran to go somewhere with her stepmom. And Eunhui, meanwhile, is angry with Miran because she prank calls her, saying she's going to harm herself because of her divorce. And Eunhui comes all the way to Seoul for her, only to find out it was a joke. When Eunhui gets to Miran's house, Miran is there drinking with some other friends, and she laughs at Eunhui and calls her a doormat, which is just terrible. So I really liked seeing the friendship between two middle-aged women because you don't usually see that in media. The friendship between these two is flawed, but has been a long and important part of their lives. This arc showed the strains that even the strongest friendships can have because of a lack of communication and respect for one another. Eunhui is clearly resentful towards Miran, which was hinted in the other episodes, like when Eunhui FaceTimes Miran. In that scene, Eunhui seemed a little awkward, like it didn't really feel like she was talking to a close friend of 30 to 40 years. Before we even knew about their backstory, I was kind of surprised to find out that they had been friends for that long because that scene felt a little awkward. I didn't really feel like Miran was held accountable for what she did to Eunhui. Instead of apologizing, she turns it back on Eunhui, saying that Eunhui should have communicated her feelings instead of being passive-aggressive, which is true, but Miran should have at least apologized in my opinion. But it was nice to see them clear the air and resolve their issues. I think the story was another example of Eunhui being kind to her friends and family to a fault. I think for the most part she's shown to be able to stand up for herself and not be pushed around, but she clearly has a soft spot for Hansu and Miran, and they were both able to take advantage of her care towards them and her nostalgia for their past. With both of them, she constantly refers to their past as teenagers, and she's always reflecting about that time. When she's angry at Miran, she even says that she only continues her friendship with her because of the gratitude she has for the things that Miran did for her in the past. Despite her success, Eunhui seems to really long for that time of youth again, which is really relatable. Oh my god, the way this story made me ugly cry. So this arc was so adorable, but so horrible at the same time, in that it just tugs at your heartstrings. In this story, we see Chunhui take care of her granddaughter for a few weeks, but what she doesn't know is that her last and only living son is in a coma after being in a truck accident. Eungi, who's like 5 years old, is burdened with hiding this from her grandma, but eventually confesses, giving us an adorable and devastating arc about grief. These 2 episodes stood out to me a lot because they had such a wholesome and happy vibe compared to the other episodes, while also having a twinge of sadness and tension underneath, since we as an audience knew why Eungi was really in Jeju Island. But at the same time, we're getting really funny and cute interactions with the 2 of them. I love the scenes where Eungi cries about the food and the chores that she's forced to do. It was really interesting to see Chunhui in a different social context or relationship, because for most of the show, she's seen as the wise leader of the village, and we don't see her in a familial context because they've either passed away or are living elsewhere. She's been seen as a more composed and calm character up until she's confronted with the possibility of her youngest son passing away like her other kids and husband did a long time ago. The actress that played Eungi was so cute, but also suspiciously good at crying. The scene where she's crying and praying at the 100 moons had me in a chokehold of tears, not even gonna lie. I really liked the bickering between Chunhui and Eungi, with Chunhui not putting up with Eungi's crying and childlike behavior, since I think that shows Chunhui saw her as an equal rather than a child or a baby. This arc also had one of my favorite scenes in the show where the other villagers take Eungi on a piggyback ride throughout the market, and seeing everyone talk about her dad and lighting up when they learn that she's Mansu's kid. Eungi clearly adores her dad, and seeing her excitement and wonder about the town and the people her dad grew up with is so special and cute. But it was also really sad at the same time because we knew there was a chance that her dad would be passing away and that she had to hide that burden from her grandma. It would have been really nice to see Mansu wake up from the coma, but I think ending the episode on a really heartbreaking note with the 100 Moons scene works well to emphasize the desperation and grief that both Eungi and Chunhui are experiencing. I was really stressed waiting to see what would happen to Mansu, and I was like, there's no way they take away Mansu from this poor grandma and child and the wife, who I didn't even mention. Watching the wife navigate through this tough situation and seeing her feel the burden of hiding Mansu's coma from his own mom was just on a whole other level of heartbreak. She just looked so broken in her scenes, and she just had no idea what to do in this situation. Like anyone would. I don't think anyone would know what to do in this type of situation. The fact that she had to stay strong not only for her daughter but for her mother-in-law as well was just awful to watch. She couldn't fully grieve the potential loss of her husband because she had to stay strong for Eungi as well. Overall, a terrible plotline. I can't believe Art Blues would do this to me. Like, why? I think this storyline was a great way to end the series because this arc and this relationship between the 2 of them was weaved into pretty much every episode. There's a lot of build-up, and the series showed how this relationship impacted the lives of both characters. For most of the show, we know that Okdong is sick and doesn't have a lot of time left. But Dongsuk is the last of the characters to find out about Okdong's illness, and throughout the show we're waiting to see how he'll react and see if he'll choose to reconcile with his mother after finding out that she's running out of time. I was also curious to see if Okdong would show more remorse for her treatment of her son in the past. For the climax of this arc, we see a bunch of scenes that make us question why Okdong acted this way and justifies Dongsuk's anger towards her. Like, after her husband/his father passes away, she gets remarried and tells Dongsuk that he's no longer her child but her nephew. And we see that when he tries to steal jewelry to get him and his mom out of that marriage and situation, she just calls him a thief and doesn't join him and lets him go off on his own. Throughout the show, I felt that Okdong didn't seem super remorseful towards her son, only staring off blankly when he was near her. It also seemed like there was a lack of remorse when she asks him to take her to Mokdo for the memorial of her second husband, who clearly brought a lot of trauma to Dongsuk. Also, when Dongsuk asks if she's sorry for what she did, she just says, "Why would I be sorry?" Dongsuk asks about not feeling a need to apologize, and her reasoning was unexpected, but it actually made a lot of sense to me. So in her mind, she was just doing what was best for her kids without thinking about how it would hurt her relationship with them. She at least acknowledges that she made mistakes and mistreated Dongsuk in the end. And that seems to be enough for him, as his attitude and tone towards her changes for the rest of the trip. Throughout their trip to Mokpo, it seemed like Dongsuk cared for Okdong more than we are initially led to believe, as he stands up to a rude waiter for her, helps her with her seatbelt constantly, helps her write certain words in Hangul, and carries her on his back in the forest. Deep down, Dongsuk was just a boy who wanted to spend time with his mom, which he himself admits when Okdong passes away at the end of the episode. This is probably the best arc of the show in my opinion, just because of the build-up and how it was weaved so well into each episode. And ending the show off with that was a really smart idea from the creators of the show. So overall, I was pretty pleasantly surprised by this K-drama and ended up liking it more than I expected. The writers did a great job of weaving each story throughout the show instead of just showcasing certain characters in an episode or two and then forgetting about them. I think once you get through the first few episodes, you really start to feel like you're watching a small town of people and you grow to really care for everyone. I think this K-drama might have fell under the radar because of some of the other really great dramas that have aired this year, but I definitely think it's worth the watch, especially if you like slice of life dramas.